right, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have on a very special guest, Adam Majors. He's a combat veteran of Iraq, medic, and psychotherapist, and author of the new book, Odysseus and the Oar. I'm going to read the synopsis from the back because I read that this morning. You know, believe it or not, I actually do some research. So I am going to read the back of this because I thought it was really awesome, and then we can kind of kick off this podcast with talking about that. And honestly, it kind of reached out to me. So here on the back of the book, it says, in Odysseus and the Oar, Healing After War and Military Service, Iraq war veteran and psychotherapist Adam Majors explores the Odyssey and its meaning for modern veterans who are navigating life after war and military service. Along the way, he uncovers an archetypal pattern that he calls the archetype of the warrior's return. Majors shows that the symbolism found in the Odyssey is mirrored by other ancient myths around the world, from the Greek, Navajo, Celtic, and Nordic traditions, and can be found in the dreams of modern veterans. Grounding interpretations of the symbolic imagery in Jungian psychological theory, Majors helps veterans and those who support them understand how the Odyssey can be understood as a map to veterans' healing and transformation process after war and military service. In the end, we are left with a broader understanding of veterans' challenges and what we can do about them. Very excited. I'll just throw this out there in the beginning. Is this book available through Dead Reckoning Collective? Is this already?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, you can order it through the Dead Reckoning Collective website, or you can snag it on Amazon.
Awesome. Sweet. All right. Well, I'm pumped to dive into that. Adam, thanks for coming on. And, I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and to talk about this and just to explore some of the themes of the book, and also just excited to have the opportunity to speak with other veterans as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is it reached out to me because of the Odyssey. It's something that we read in high school, which I back then I couldn't really give two shits about. But then as I got older, and I went to film school and understanding story and structure and kind of the warrior culture. And you start diving more into it, especially after serving multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that feeling that draws you to the adventure, but I do like how you're, like I said, I saw that and I'm like, oh my God, I'm very excited to talk about this. So what led you down that path? I mean, I know you're an Army medic, correct? And you had a tour in Iraq, and what was that? Why did you join, and what was that like? And we can kind of shift into the book.
Well, honestly, I mean, from as young as I can remember, I remember being like 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, running around my grandparents' farm, pretending to be a soldier. I think I was a pretty unusual little kid. So I've got a 4-year-old little boy now. And what he watches at 4 years old is very different from what I was watching at 4 years old. But I remember being 4 years old and watching the movie Glory, or, the Memphis Belle film. I think I knew at an early age that I was just destined for this path. I was destined to go to war. And, frankly, there was just something in me that felt called to it. Ended up in the Army at age 17. I did the split op thing and joined the reserves, switched to the Guard after that, and ended up spending 6 of my 8 years in the Army with Sapper Companies. So I was a combat medic with the 1138 Sapper Company when I went to Iraq in 2007. We did route clearance and reconnaissance patrols, mainly doing the MSRs throughout Baghdad, main supply routes. But we got tasked to do route clearance for the Battle of Sadr City from March to May of 2008. And that 3 months was pretty intense. So I read a RAND report at one point that said that they fired 800 tank rounds in those couple of months in Sadr City, which was more tank rounds than were fired in the first Gulf War and the rest of OIF and OEF combined.
Jesus,
so pretty hairy time that we had in Sadr City. And for us, the average mission, we'd sleep about 4 hours a day. And the rest of the time, we were, on Arrows, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Gold. We were patrolling those routes and getting the bombs off them. And the average day, we might travel, once we started clearing, especially on Gold, we might travel 100 meters and find anywhere between 8 and 15 bombs. I think our record one day was 18 EFPs and IEDs. And we'd usually get hit at least a few times on those missions. So I came home completely wrecked from that. So spent the first year pretty much drunk the entire time, and had a complete and total breakdown about 1 year after I got home. So I started having panic attacks every day, which was very inconvenient for me because At this time, I'm a sergeant, hoping to promote to E6 and go back to Afghanistan with my unit. And when I started having those panic attacks, it was a wrench in my plans. And so I basically did everything I could to get better. I started going to therapy. I got completely sober. I stopped smoking cigarettes, literally doing anything and everything I could to get better. Because I wanted to go back and I just couldn't. I had panic attacks every single day, and I got to the point where I couldn't even leave my house. So my life was wrecked. I lost like 40 pounds and was like a shadow of myself. And one thing led to another. And after several years, I fell in love with depth psychology kind of by accident. So I'd had a lot of really powerful dreams throughout my own crisis and in the course of my recovery. And having those dreams got me really curious about what they were trying to tell me. And ultimately, I had a conversation one day, and somebody said, "Have you ever heard of Carl Jung?" And they suggested I read his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And that was the beginning of everything changing. So I just fell in love with depth psychology. One thing led to another, and here I am today. I kind of accidentally became a therapist. So
that's kind of funny that you say that. It's like you going in from combat veteran, like you said, going through that process, be like, I just kind of fell into being a therapist. Yeah.
100% true. It's a fact. Like I'm probably the least likely person to ever be a therapist, and yet here I am.
Mm-hmm. It works out that way. I mean, I think a lot of our career paths, I'm one of the few that like knew what I wanted to do when I was 13. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. So it's like, that's so rare. Even my parents, everyone talks about like, you knew when you were that young. I was like, yeah, I loved it. But just like everyone else and all the other veteran companies that are out there, no one knew that they were going to be a t-shirt company or a coffee company or or a consulting company or motivational like it's just, everything evolves and say you fall into it, but you kind of do,
Sometimes it's like the path chooses you.
Exactly. Yeah. So how was that journey then? Like you said, kind of going through and doing the research for this book, and, so we can kind of dive in and, I've heard of the, Carl Jung. I did take some psychology back in high school. But also, I've been hearing more and more about it. I'm sure you can talk to a little bit about it, but I think we see that in modern times beyond veterans, the psychology of like in the last few years with, like you see the rise of like Jordan Peterson, you see the rise of, like these psychologists that are like, say helping, you know what I mean? Like men finding their way again in the Western world, because suffice to say, it's a little too easy. It's like what your millions of years of even evolution and psychology just doesn't change on a dime, and culture, is different wherever you go. But like, I think it's something that is pretty prominent now. And it's always, I think in the last few years, it's becoming more to the forefront where it's like, yeah, get out there. You don't have to take a pill to fix something. Like just get out and go get some exercise, like, it's very rudimentary, but at the same point, it's significant, because can you kind of emphasize on that? Like, is that something you kind of came across, especially with like the Odyssey, that call to adventure, what you do when you come back, all that kind of stuff? Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is DRC20, DRC20, for 20% off 9line Apparel products. I say again, DRC20, not 10, not 15, 20%, not 25, because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the 9line Apparel podcast for future discount codes and more conversation with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so, the first thing I'll say is that, we're in this, we're in a moment in our culture where a lot of things are changing, right? And so, if we take kind of like a larger historical perspective, we can appreciate that that, as you said, things do change, and sometimes they change really rapidly. And I think we're in that kind of time right now that so much has changed in our lifetimes. And I think that that's a significant thing to be aware of as we consider even what it means for warrior culture. And one of the things I talk about in my book is just how we imagine warriors and what warriorhood means has changed pretty dramatically just in the last few hundred years. And for example, I mean, there are T-shirts that say dysfunctional veteran and plenty of veterans who wear them. But it's very hard to imagine the veterans of World War I or World War II wearing a shirt with that label. Mm-hmm. And so I think it says something about the way in which the culture has changed, the way in which we imagine ourselves has changed, and the way in which we imagine our problems has changed. And I think that that's where my book kind of starts, is with a profound acknowledgement for the fact that the way we imagine veterans' problems has itself become problematic. Mm-hmm. There was a really important research article that was noticed, but I think that kind of got quickly forgotten. So back in like 2020, 2021, a research article came out that was in the Military Times and things like that, but it was published by the Journal of the American Medical Association. And you don't get published there with half-baked research. You have to really have your stuff wired together tight. And this research was published by Maria Steenkamp and her research team. And what they found was that the first-line evidence-based treatments were only working for a minority of veterans. So about 2/3 of veterans got the benefits that they got from those treatments were really no better off than control groups that were just getting meditation. And in the summary of that research article, the researchers say this calls into question whether the problems that veterans face are best conceptualized as like a trauma disorder that can be treated with short-term monotherapies, and whether we need to reimagine it as a highly complex, uniform condition, multiform condition, meaning like multiple aspects of this problem, not just one, not just trauma, but a multiform condition that is very complex that requires more specialized and individualized treatment. So that's what those researchers said. And my book is laying out a new way of conceptualizing veterans' problems, and we're following the Odyssey to do that. I think that the ancient Greeks understood how complex veterans' challenges are after war or leaving military service. It's not just guys who went to combat and who were behind the friendly side of a rifle, but anyone who serves in the military, that changes you in fundamental ways. It changes your personality. It changes how you imagine yourself. It changes how you imagine your problems. And that has to be addressed. It's not just the trauma that has to be addressed. It's the whole soul, the whole personality. So that's where I start my book, is taking on the whole entire way that we conceptualize veterans' challenges and seeking to create a new narrative that is, I think, leads us to healing.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, I have yet to read. I'm excited to read it. So I guess I would apply this personally. I mean, I got out in 2009, 3 deployments, but then went on to do more contracting work. So I have a total of 9 total rotations.
Not to mention going to Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last week.
Last week, yeah, and 2 years ago during the invasion. Yeah, but yes, yeah. I think I remember identifying, and I always, it's kind of a nerd. I don't say a nerd thing to do, but I guess it kind of is, like, as a film nerd. But like, I looked at a lot of stuff growing up, like you, watching Glory, watching Saving Private Ryan, watching Black Hawk Down. But you also go through, the hero's journey, but also kind of being like, okay, what's next? Because I remember guys were struggling with, even after our first deployment, we were still in. And I remember going through that pretty hard after my first deployment. And I knew that I had to like keep, I don't say pushing forward, essentially what I always kind of, in my simpleton infantry mind, it's like, all right, go to the next thing, go to the next best thing, or go to the next thing to move forward. And mine was snipers. And I got selected, and I remember I almost quit because when I was in the sniper indoctrination platoon, which is like 30 days. You get your, they teach you, they train you, you get hazed for 30 days before you go to the school if they deem you worthy to go to school. And I remember it wasn't that I wasn't doing well. It was just that I missed my guys like really bad. Like, and they were not even a block away. I mean, this is Hawaii. This is Kaneohe Bay. I don't know if anybody knows that Kaneohe Bay is like, it's like 5 square miles, if that. Like, and so I could easily walk to the barracks like that were 200-300 yards away, but I felt like I was a world away. And I remember just thinking like, okay, I even talked to my buddy. I was like, hey man, do you got a spot for a team leader position? Cause I want to go back with you guys. But then I also knew like, okay, for me to help in the next mission, I can be a scout sniper and I can help put dudes down, IED in placers, all that stuff, and help my guys in that direction. But I always felt like, I'm sure you probably talk on this, is like, I remember getting out though and having that mentality of like, okay, be proud of your service, always be, very proud of what I did, but also kind of like not say that no one cares, but it's in my head to kind of give that like, hey, no one cares. Do the next thing. Prove to other people what you can do in your next job. You always have to keep proving yourself. So never walk into a room and expect people to hand you something or expect them to be like, oh, that's him. We gotta roll out the red carpet or like, oh, you can get special treatment or anything with that. I remember getting out and being like, okay, what's the next thing? What do I have to do to keep moving forward? And for me, that felt like contracting. I always say that was my therapy, because it was like an easy transition into the civilian world, making money, going back to war. But it's like that calm. It's like that stepping down slowly, even though we still got into, still got blown up, still got shot at, it felt like you had more control. And maybe, and again, we'll talk this in a second. It's like, I'm sure you might have discovered this, but it's like, not having that control in the military. I mean, that was always my issue, was like the Marine Corps always like, hey, I want to stay and keep fighting. Nope. Hey, I want to change my helmet. Nope. Hey, what can I think outside the box? Nope. And I feel like guys kind of going, let's say contractors, but contractors, we got to do what we needed to do. And, big boy rule, we call it big boy rules, So, but no, I agree with that. I think, is that something that you guys found in the research, which was guys wanting to go back, or there's like this yearning to keep going back? That's always a part of them. And like, look, I've told my wife this, I've gone down that journey myself for 15 years. Like, I know it's always a part of me. It's always an itch that will be scratched in one way or another. But I also know I have to balance that with my family. Like I can't keep going. And by the way, I just came back from Ukraine last week. I agree with you. Like it's, it's kind of good to say, but as you're a therapist, psychotherapist, but I'm sure you've heard this, but it's like, for me, like, I know I got good at war. Mm-hmm. And I know I could operate in the black. I knew I felt comfortable, and I validated that earlier on. But when I stepped into Ukraine in 2022, I said this before, it was like, in your mind, it's like, do you still have it? How do you feel? And when we crossed the border from Poland to Ukraine, it felt at home, that chaos felt comforting, because I knew what I was doing. I was with a group of guys that knew what they were doing. And it's kind of like that hero's journey, or like you watch a movie and they're like, okay, who's our team that we send in? I mean, like when the world, asked for its men of action, who answered? It's one of those things like, who's going to step up to the plate? And that's what I feel like sometimes when it's like, yeah, we'll go in and we'll help evacuate or help coordinate the evac of orphans. Yeah, we'll bring in supplies. You guys do the fight. And then, but we're crazy enough to be able to, yeah, we'll make these runs, but you focus on, but we're a part of the mission. We're part of the fight. And so, and it's like this, I mean, the guys we were with were stacked. I mean, special operations dudes, we're all on that same level. We're all like, hey, let's fucking do this, So I'm sure, like I said, yeah, I'm sure you ran into this in your research, but it does feel like that. Like, and I guess I know I'm getting a little therapy session with you right now. And so, yeah. So
I feel right at home here too. And I was going to say, so what you just shared with me, first, I've experienced that. I still experience that. Like, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see some of these accounts and I see what guys are out there doing right now. And I'm like, fuck, I would love to be out there with them, and I have to recognize that and work with that on an inner level. And this is actually a huge part of what I talk about in my book. But I wanted to say that what you just shared with me reminds me a lot of the conversations I get to have with groups of veterans at the Battle Within, which is, what this is. So I work as the clinical manager with the Battle Within, and we have a couple of programs for veterans and first responders. One's a 5-day intensive known as the Revenant Journey, where we're walking through the archetype of the warrior's return. And what this is it's a process. It's like a post-war or post-military initiation process where you're helping somebody form a new adaptation, that we've all formed psychological and emotional adaptations that allow us to do these incredibly difficult jobs like the ones you were just describing. Like that is the gradient or the path that feels most natural for us. It's like that is the groove that we're in, and that's the groove we want to follow because we've become psychologically adapted to doing that. It's very difficult to get out of that groove. And one of the things I talk at length about in my book is what I call the warrior complex. And so Jung introduced the term complexes. And he did this with a word association experiment, which is really famous. And he actually created the device that was kind of the precursor to our modern day lie detector test. But he didn't create that to detect lies. He created it to detect complexes. And what he showed is that if you evoke certain images, that it can interrupt the flow of consciousness. So it's like we have this idea that the ego or the conscious personality is in control of the psyche, and that it is directing what we say and what we do and the things we're in control of. And what Jung proved with that word association experiment, which is what got him famous to begin with, is that he showed in his research that even encountering an image can interrupt the flow of consciousness. I think a lot of veterans can understand this when you think about, for us, when I was in Baghdad, right, we had to warn each other before we'd light up a cigarette, because that flash at night is usually followed by a boom. It's like you usually have the flash and then you have the explosion. And so when we're doing route clearance at night, it's like that flash is the first thing that you encounter before something bad is about to happen. And so if we're lighting up a cigarette, if we're closing a hatch on the door or the vehicle or something, we're warning everybody. Hey, I'm about to shut the hatch. Hey, I'm about to light up a cigarette. Hey, I'm going to take a picture. Don't freak out. And encountering that image, that experience can trigger a complex. And all of a sudden the ego is along for the ride. So that's kind of an example of a trauma complex, right? But with the warrior complex, you can kind of think about it as like, here's this warrior image which has come to possess the personality. And we start, you go through basic training and now you're a Marine. You're not Ethan or Adam or Joe.
Yeah.
You're a Marine,
God's gift to the world. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You are a soldier. You are a weapon of warfare, and you are here to do the most violent things people can be asked to do in the name of your country. And that you can't do those things with ordinary consciousness. You can't just give a civilian a gun and teach him how to shoot, or teach him how to clear rooms and say, all right, go to war, which is why we have basic training. It's an initiation that reforms the personality along the gradient of the warrior archetype. And so you're instilling in them this, martial warrior spirit that can do these violent things. And I think that what we miss, though, is that, for a moment, we'll just consider the psychic law of inertia, right? So you're familiar with like the law of inertia, right? That if an object in motion stays in motion, or an object at rest stays at rest until another force acts upon it. And the same thing is true in psychology. A force in motion stays in motion. And when we set into motion that warrior energy through basic training, you're putting a really significant force into motion. It's going in a certain direction. It's been honed for warfare. And then you put a person with that energy inside them in warfare, and they're in a year-long gun battle fighting for their lives, that motion is picking up more energy. And it doesn't just stop on its own. And maybe you discharge the person and they take off their uniform, and maybe the friction of everyday life wears on them a little bit, but not much. And one of the things that we see in ancient myths around the world, including the Odyssey, is that in stories from the Navajo tradition, Celtic tradition, ancient Greece, and did I say Nordic already?
No, you haven't, but go. Yeah,
Nordic,
before.
Celtic. Well, if I didn't, I did now. But in those traditions, you have these stories of these warriors who get caught up in this driven warrior-centric way of being, and they lose themselves. And they're harmed to the people around them, and the people around them are afraid of them. And in each and every one of these stories, it is a compensatory opposite figure that brings them back to themselves. In every single case, it's a woman. Mm-hmm. It is female figures that kind of serve as a symbolic opposite to, which is not about actual women. It's about what we would call the archetypal feminine. It's like the other half of our soul that wants to provide balance to the warrior and help him remember who he really is deep down at his core. And so I think that's one of the things, is that in ancient warrior societies, they would have post-war initiations where they would enact this in rituals and ceremonies. And they would help warriors to remember that the warrior is not all that they are. And in our culture, we don't do that. And so I think what we do is we just keep following. We're drawn. We want to keep going back because we don't know what else to do. Our personality remains possessed by this force, and like an object in motion, stays in motion until an equal or opposite force can redirect it. And that's what we do at the Battle Within. That's what we do through this program. And we need this at scale, and that's why I've written this book, is that, that's what I'm talking about in here, is how this process can unfold organically and naturally, but you have to be conscious of what's going on. It doesn't just happen magically. Mm-hmm. And it can happen through psychotherapy if the psychotherapist knows how to facilitate that process, which is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about getting this book into the hands of psychotherapists as well.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy kind of say that too, because I feel like, you see that in the films. Like I always approach it like most people, approach things like the books, writing the books, obviously, like The Hero's Journey, Heroes with a Thousand Faces, all that stuff, Joseph Campbell, we apply that to film. And if you really kind of sit down and they're entertaining, but the great films and the great stories, they have that aspect. And, even like the Sylvester Stallones and the 80s actions, like there's always, you're right. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because that's the first time, I shouldn't say the first time, but like, I've noticed that myself, but now that, a psychotherapist has put it to words, you're like, oh yeah, that does make sense, because what it's always the woman bringing them back, or it's always like, please come home to me, that kind of stuff. Like you saw it in like 1917, you see it in all these, like, especially 1917 was amazing at the very end. He has like, he
I'm gonna have to watch that.
Yeah, it's at the very end, like he pulls out a photo and it's his wife and daughter, so it's like, and you have something to fight for, I guess. That would be, like I said, within the hero's journey, you're fighting for something. And most of the time it does boil down to, I'm fighting for my family, or I'm fighting for the ones that I love, whether it be a wife or children or something like that, and it's funny that, like I said, you kind of, but then you see it like in 80s, in all the action films, or in the 90s, like you see that's how it translates to film.
Totally.
I don't want to say the damsel in distress, but you're going and you're saving somebody through your skills, or in the films, they're saving, the female lead in the action film, but it still has that, but they're warriors trying to make their way to accomplish the mission and, save the day and all this other stuff. But it's and it's funny too in real life, because I know a lot of guys that, God, they were fucking tweaked, and they get married and they have kids, and I'm like, God damn, good for you, man. Like I've been more happy when guys get married and settle down and have kids than I do when they keep fighting, because I know they're trying to punch their ticket. You
Right.
know, like I know I have tons of friends and I knew, you know, and going back to Ukraine, like I know guys that have fought there, and like, believe me, you know, I talked with my wife when I came back. She's like, you know, she just directly asked, she was like, would you have gone and fought? And I was like, yeah, 100%. I was like, if we weren't married right now, I would be over there. I said, if we didn't have kids, I would have done 20 trips already. Like not fighting, but more like would have done the medical runs. I would have done the crazy runs in, you know, but we have kids. And when I went, I had a daughter that was a year old. So I was like, that's my responsibility, but I'm still going to do this for a very short period of time,
Yeah.
you know? But it is great though to see guys that are finding women essentially it kind of settle down. And I think, you know, I've seen that where they fulfill themselves with family. And I think that takes up a significant amount of like that warrior side that, you know, now it's almost like, yeah, you were trained in basic training, you're doing all these things, but now you have a family to, I don't want to say to train, but essentially be like, yeah, now you can pass on that, what you've learned, what you've been through to the next generation. And it's almost just as fulfilling. You know, but yeah, I think seeing that in guys, it does make me happy. Like it does. Cause there's guys that I knew that would just, you know, women, we don't need them, blah, blah, blah. And they were the first ones to get married.
Sure.
Or guys that were looking to punch their ticket by multiple deployments. And they, you know, it's like, it's not suicide by cop, but or suicide by war, but it is like, I don't care. I'm going to keep going until I die, you know, and I knew guys like that. And then they get married and they have kids now. And now they, you know, are settled. It does make me happy, you know.
Yeah.
And,
hopefully like a sobering force for them. And in my work as a psychotherapist, usually that's one of the things that can bring people in is when they're destroying their families and they can't help it and they can't seem to stop and they don't know how to choose a different path or to, you know, that it's almost like they'll describe sometimes that it's like there's another part of them that is hijacking the show. You know, and I think that that's one of the most devastating things that, you know, a lot of veterans experience is that their families are the love and the light of their lives. And yet without their intention, you know, they do things or make mistakes that undermine their relationship with their families. It's probably one of the most common things I hear at the Battle Within is guys who are seeking help because they've been told they have to. Like their wife is putting it down as an ultimatum. Like, if you don't do something, we're done. Yeah. You know, because they can't take the explosive behavior anymore or, you know, whatever it is. And, you know, it's really sad when it gets to that point. And at the same time, those negative consequences can be a real impetus for change. And I think that that's a nice tie-in too for what you mentioned about the hero's journey. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. And so I went to school at Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is where the Joseph Campbell Library is. And I actually benefited from the Joseph Campbell Scholarship when I was there. And so I'm very fond of Joseph Campbell. And I've actually gotten to hold in the library Joseph Campbell's copies of Carl Jung's books.
Oh, that's cool.
You can flip through them and see in the margins where he's underlined things, where he was learning it for the first time. And so you can almost see where he's forming his own idea of the hero's journey as you flip through the pages of these books of Jung's that he was reading. And, you know, Jung kind of really made explicit this idea that these mythic themes and stories reflect inner psychological realities. And you mentioned the hero's journey. And just for anyone who's not familiar with it, you know, like on a basic level, you've got this hero who starts out the story experiencing the status quo. Life is just what it is, but something happens that becomes the call to adventure, you know, and it initiates them to go on this new path. Usually there's a refusal of the call. And so for a lot of veterans, it could be like something bad is happening, or they start having panic attacks like I did, or maybe they make some bad decisions and their wife is saying, you need to get your butt in therapy, you know, or maybe somebody has kids and they realize they're not the kind of mother or father that they want to be. And so usually there's a refusal of the call, like, man, I don't know about that. I don't think I want to go to therapy. I don't think I want to tell somebody I need help. But usually when things get bad enough, they'll say, all right, I'm going. So, you know, Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins is like, I don't want to take the ring to wherever it's got to go, you know, or Luke Skywalker's like, I'm not so sure I want to go to outer space. But then something happens that pushes them across that line where they cross this threshold from the known world into the unknown world. And for Jung, what this symbolized, just this part that we've gone over so far, is where the ego has been adapted to the world it's in, to the world of conscious problems. But something happens where the ego is no longer adapted to face the problems it faces. And you can kind of think of this like an investment, right? So if you're an investor and you're investing in a company and you can see that that company is a mess and that it's got problems, you're not going to invest your money here anymore. You're going to take your money and invest it somewhere else. And so that's what the psyche does in its wisdom. When it sees that the ego has lost its way and the ego doesn't know what to do. So like the warrior coming home from war, the warrior knows what to do in war, but the warrior doesn't know what to do about his panic attacks. He doesn't know what to do about his depression. He doesn't know how to relate to his wife and his family. This is not what he was trained for. And so what the unconscious will do is it will withdraw psychic energy from the ego and reinvest that energy in the unconscious. And that's what it symbolizes when the hero goes from the known world into the unknown world. And when they go into the unknown world in these stories, that's where they meet all of these helpers and mentors. So Frodo Baggins meets, Aragorn or the Ranger or Gimli, the dwarf, and Legolas, the archer elf guy, and Gandalf, and then Galadriel, who gives him this light that shines the way in the darkness. And ultimately, that prepares them to face the ultimate challenge in the abyss that leads them through this death and rebirth that leaves them changed so they can bring the boon of their adventure back home. And that ultimately this reflects the descent into the unconscious, where you encounter other aspects of the self, other attitudes and characteristics that are missing from your conscious personality. And we learn to integrate all these parts of the self that are missing. And for warriors, a lot of that, I think, is what's symbolized by the archetypal feminine, right? These parts of us that can help us to hold ourselves through our suffering and to relate differently to our anxiety or our depression, so that we can face the underlying trauma in the abyss and be transformed and changed. And I think that's the kind of the mistake of a lot of modern therapies, is they just want to go from here down to the abyss without helping a person prepare for the hardships of the abyss, without helping a person to integrate these aspects of the self that they need to face the trauma that's down here. And I think that's what the Odyssey is showing, that in the Odyssey, you've kind of got on the cover of our book here, you've got Odysseus standing here with no armor on, facing a modern warrior who's just burdened with all the weight that he's prepared to go to war with. And Odysseus has this oar that he's gifted when he is in the underworld. So when Odysseus makes his descent, he's given this gift of this oar that is ultimately the tool that helps him to get home, because he has to sail home from war in Troy. And he's passing that gift on to modern warriors. So he's taking the boon of this transformation process and giving it to people in need. And I think that this is ultimately something that every veteran, combat veteran especially, is called to do, to go through this hero's journey, this process of transformation, not where we maintain the same exact way of being forever, but where we learn a new way of being by encountering aspects of our own unconscious that are opposite and compensatory, to the psyche. So a lot of people might find this to be woke bullshit. And yet it's not. So if you want to reject science, and if you want to reject thousands of years of seasoned wisdom from cultures all around the world, be my guest. But it also aligns with the findings of modern research having to do with psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And so I really believe that this is a way forward that the veteran community has been needing. And I'm really hoping that we can be successful in a community at providing the kind of redirection we need as a whole. This isn't a meaningless message here. This isn't a meaningless book. This is a book that has the potential to help us refocus our efforts on the transformation of the warrior, and to get us out of this kind of unhelpful pattern that we have about just trying to go straight to the trauma and treat mountains of horrific experiences with absolutely no legitimate preparation, no transformation, and without trying to redirect that energy that's put into motion through basic training and military experience and warfare.
Hmm.
So I really, obviously, I'm passionate about this,
Hmm.
um, and hope we can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it sounds like too the way that, like you said, you're approaching it in the psychological way. But even what you said before is the redirection. And I feel like a lot of guys, like you said, you go through all this stuff and then you stop, and it's
Yeah.
like you can't do that. Again, I don't know if I've just been fortunate in my life where I know I have to kind of plan for the next thing, set the next goals. That helped transition me, going to the next thing, refocusing the direction, knowing that like you can't just leave this behind, but also knowing I'm not going to stay in the Marine Corps and go MARSOC or, whatever. Like I have to separate, but I'm still going to be a part of this culture. And I think like what you've said too is like you can see guys who are trying to figure that out. Like, by the way, this is all, I don't want to say unexplored territory. Obviously, you've had World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, but a different culture too, by the way. Bury that shit and move on. So it's not like World War II veterans were like, hey man, social media, that's how I'm feeling. Like those guys came back and they're like, we did our job and that's it. Like everyone did it,
Yep.
and, obviously Vietnam was much different. And even then those guys just buried that shit and move forward. Like,
Totally.
or and say move forward, but it was a different time. And I feel like that too. I feel like guys, we are 15 years on, at least like for me, I got an 09. It's
Right.
now 15 years on. Other guys, it's 20. I think you're seeing that where everything is much more, people can communicate more with today's technology. And I feel like those issues are coming up, but it's also people with, like I said, the redirection of stuff. I'm seeing more guys that are, hey, let's go do other things. Like let's accomplish another mission, and then you kind of slowly start talking. That's where the talking therapy comes in, when you start to talk with guys like maybe, like Green Beret Racing Foundation or, other stuff where they're like, hey, let's go race bikes. Don't kill yourself this weekend. Why don't we go race some ATVs? You get that adrenaline dump. You get, you get the camaraderie and you kind of figure things out. Do you kind of see that? Like, again, I know you're in the psychotherapy world, but do you see that a lot of prominence coming out of that where guys they're finding their own therapies, probably, taking the long way around, but at least getting to that aspect, like you said, of redirection, figuring things out. I'm sure, sitting down, and like no one wants to sit down with a therapist. Like I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not a therapist guy. Like it's just great talking here, and I'm sure I would enjoy this, what you guys are doing at your sit downs, which I think would be much more up my alley than going to, like, my wife's like, go see a therapist. I'm like, I don't want to fucking see a therapist. So like, right away, I'm not a fan. Only maybe because I've gone through this enough where I don't say like I feel like I need to go see a therapist, but it's like I before I met her, I had 10 years of dealing with this. So I knew what worked for me. But I feel like, if you notice that with guys where it's kind of like, hey, with the redirect, like I like how you said the redirection, because, I don't think it's woke shit from, I think when people probably hear the feminine aspect of things, they're like, oh my God, but it's like, well, that's not exactly what you mean. Like, it's not, hey, right, you gotta turn into a bitch now and talk about your, not say you talk about your problems, you gotta talk about your problems, but like, it's not, I think that just, some guys are just like, hey, I've gone from this incredibly masculine thing and now you're bringing up the feminine, whatever. But it's like, no, dude, it's just like, it's the way to describe it as you need to move on to the next process. And you do help, whatever finding that is, but psychologically getting to that point. And then like I do, like I said, with that redirection, where do you put that energy to make sure it's not, you said, destroying you? Do you see in that with guys that have, say, you've seen now that like, oh, I could have done this 10 years ago, like, right. But they took the long way around, like, I've done all these activities,
Yeah. I mean, the way I usually see it from my perspective is, and I work with a lot of really tough dudes. I mean, these guys are not lacking in masculinity at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're some of the hardest people that probably ever walk this earth. So, I work with people now and have worked with people, Ranger Regiment guys, former Delta operators, SEALs. I mean, these guys are tough. They can and have chewed nails for a very long time. But when things get bad enough, when it gets really, 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 really dark and everything is on the line, most people are willing to try just about anything. And I think that, a lot of the people that I've worked with have experienced the same things that we see depicted in these ancient myths. So in the realm of Celtic mythology, you have Cuchulainn, this hard-ass, warrior who's unstoppable. In the myth, the cattle raid of Cooley, nothing can stop him. He slays hundreds of warriors at a time. He's indestructible. But one day after battle, he loses himself, and he attacks his own charioteer, and he starts going after his own allies. I mean, he is making a wreck of his own life here because he's just caught up in this bloodlust, that he's become possessed by this way of being that doesn't suit his situation. That's way of being suitable for war, but it's not suitable when you're trying to relate with your friends and your family. And this symbolic thing plays out where Cuchulainn is met by a group of naked women. And there's nothing literal about this. It's symbolic because these women leave the castle walls and they come out completely and totally vulnerable. They represent a way of being that Cuchulainn himself needs to embody, that he needs to let down his armor, soften up, leave behind the castle walls, take off his armor, which is something Odysseus has to do on his journey, by the way. He's told, do not put on your armor at one point when he's facing the most severe challenges. And it's symbolizing this need to be completely vulnerable and receptive. And these women in the cattle raid of Cooley take Cuchulainn and they dunk him in 3 vats of water. So they're taking this hard, rigid warrior and they're dunking him in the softest, most receptive substance on the planet. They're putting him in water. Nothing is more receptive than that. And as they dunk him in the first vat, it bursts. They put him in the second, and the water boils as big as fists. And they put him in the third vat, and he comes back to himself and remembers who he is and where he is. And it's this transformative moment for him when he starts to see himself differently. We have the same thing in the Odyssey, in ancient Greek culture, where Odysseus is given a bath by Circe, and him and his men receive baths from Circe and her attendants. And it said that they were made stronger and better looking than they were before. And when they saw each other, they wept, and the halls of the house echoed with their weeping. And not to challenge modern warriors of today so much, but I mean, these dudes back then that created these stories were pretty hard. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to be pretty hard to run into battle with a sword hacking people apart. And this is how they saw it. They saw the need to adopt a more receptive way of being, to integrate the archetypal feminine. And one of the things that Jung said is that everything that irritates us about others can teach us something about ourselves. And so when we're put off by a term like archetypal feminine, or when we see people crying and we call them snowflakes, it's kind of a way that we tell on ourselves. And it speaks to the fact that we are often resistant to the things in our own unconscious that we actually need to help us find our way. And so in my work, when these hard dudes come to me, they're usually ready for anything. And when this other path is offered to them and they give it a try, it doesn't take long. Like at the Battle with Them, when we run this 5-day program, but when they come to the program, they know what they're signing up for. We let them know what they're getting into. And by Tuesday, when they have lunch, it's a whole different ballgame. Mm-hmm. Second day of the program, because these guys, what happens is we create an environment in which they all know they're pretending. They all know that they put on a mask where they're Sergeant so-and-so or Captain whoever, and they're this hard, tough dude that doesn't feel anything and that's just always fine. And when they show up at the program, it becomes pretty clear everybody knows that everybody's got that mask on. Mm-hmm. And on Tuesday of the program, they take that mask off and they talk about how they're really feeling and how they're really doing. We're not reliving past traumas. We're not asking them to tell us about the worst things that ever happened to them. We're just saying, just honestly, how are you really feeling? How are you really doing? This is your moment to take off the armor, to just show us who you really are. And inevitably, almost every guy in that room will shed tears. And it's this really special thing because for many of these guys, it's the first time they've ever done anything like this in their whole entire lives. And a lot of guys will say things like, it's just nice to not have to pretend anymore. Mm-hmm. And like, I feel like I got 1,000 pounds off my back. And it's just so nice not to have to hold all this in. I've been holding it in for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And it's nice to just be allowed to be human and not have to fake it. And I think that's the thing is like, we all know on some level how much pain we're in. And it's a really difficult thing to take off that mask and let other people see it. But when guys are sitting in this circle and they see other hard dudes in the circle around them and they see that, holy smokes, this guy's a naval special warfare, officer. And look at the pain he's in. This guy, he's a former, sergeant major who, did 7 deployments, to Iraq and Afghanistan. And that we're all in pain. And that if it's okay for them to be in pain, it's okay for me to be in pain. Like none of us have to keep up this charade any longer. It's just a disservice to us all. Mm-hmm. And so the guys that are eating bullets are not the guys who are doing this work. And I think that as a community, it's our responsibility to advocate for one another, to share these spaces, to have these experiences where we can just be a whole human being. We've earned the right. Mm-hmm. And that is what saves us, is allowing ourselves to be whole and to stop shaming each other or to put it, implying that there's something negative about having feelings. So I think that that's one of the key messages of the Odyssey too, that Odysseus finally gets home when he takes off his mask, admits who he really is, and shares his heartache with an audience and lets people know how much pain he's really in. That's the moment in the Odyssey where the Phaeacians say, let's get this guy in a boat and let's get him back to Ithaca. Mm-hmm. Let's get him back home. That's the key pivotal moment where he finally gets there. But he has to go through first a lot of transformation with Circe and Calypso. These female figures set the stage for him to have that moment. Mm-hmm. So it's not the usual tough guy message that we're used to, right? Mm-hmm. Harden up, Yeah. This is the opposite. That's what the ancient wisdom is. The ancient wisdom is the opposite of the message we're used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, I think that's, like everything you've been talking about too, like just kind of thinking back on my transition, that was something that you could tell is like, hey man, it's time to relax a little bit. Like you've earned the time to relax. I remember telling myself if I ever made it out alive, I would do certain things just like, hey, I'm going to go out and party with my friends, or I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to do that. And I did, and it did feel good to, especially at that time, early 20s, to be like, yeah, I lived, I survived it. Like it was really weird hitting 25 because I didn't think I'd see it. I do remember turning 25 and being like, oh, that's right. I lived, I'm still here. Like it was, I remember being younger and being like, if I see 25, it might be a miracle, because of doing the 3 deployments and doing what I was doing, being shot, being blown up, everything else that went with it. But yeah, I do agree, I do agree with you. I think, being able to, like I said, you earned it, you can relax now. And
you've earned it.
Yeah, you've earned it. And I felt like that when I got out. I was like, you've earned your life. Now what are you going to do with it? And, I'm sure some guys have that frustration, in modern times of, you've done all this stuff and, people don't feel like, I'm sure they look at other people and be like, hey, you don't know how good you have it, and I think that's always just military mentality. Like you don't really know how bad it can really get. Like even just with, when's the last time you ran into somebody that was a civilian that signed 4 years of their life away, or that was told to do something hard? They don't do it. And it's like not their, I always say that's not their prerogative. That's fine. But, I think where some guys get frustrated with that, it's like, you don't understand how bad this can get. And, and back then, 15 years ago, people kind of understood it. Maybe it was a generational thing where, you came back and, for me, it was like, hey, I've earned this. Now what are you going to do with it? That was my mentality coming out. But I think guys are probably a little more, especially guys getting out at 20 years right now, going from, our time, which was 15 years ago, to 20, and now getting out and getting thrown into the world now, I'm sure culturally is a pretty big shock, like, so like when we went in at 18 years old, and then they're getting out at 38.
I know.
And so, like I said, you're dealing with it. Delta operators, guys, I've talked with my fair share. We work with Warfighter Scuba Foundation, so we have dev group guys coming through and other guys that just did multiple deployments, and it helps, but also, like I said, the psychology of like what you're doing, I think is a big factor it's kind of there, but it's missing because it's not directly in your face, like I said, that's why I like really talking with you right now, because it is putting something, like, hey, this is the path that here's the actual outline, and then doing the additional therapies. Like totally. A lot of guys at these other foundations or yours, you said the Battle Within, but it's like, okay, doing what you're doing now, but now include this because this is the why. This is
exactly
what this is the why you're feeling this way. This is why this kind of works, but maybe you should psychologically go this route and then physically go this route.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's why I'm enjoying talking with you now, because it feels like, maybe I was fortunate with knowing some of these archetypes because I'm a filmmaker, a storyteller by trade. So I kind of already, I don't say knew that already, but like it's
you have a way of relating to it.
Yeah, exactly. I have a way of relating to it as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, kind of living my life that in that direction. You can subconsciously be on that path, right. Like I said, culturally, again, not to stray away from it, but culturally, like in the last 5-6 years, I saw people like setting goals, like the Jocko stuff or even the Jordan Peterson stuff was like clean your room. It's like, I was already doing that. I was kind of like seeing things I've been doing that was like, oh yeah, I am on the right path. Cause now these, people just don't have guidance anymore. And they're like, oh my God, I did clean my room. I did do some push-ups today. Am I accountable? And now as people need that, they find it through now social media because the people around them aren't telling them anymore. Yep. Now they're authority figures on social media, which is a double-edged sword, but you can at least be like, hey, people are finding that. And like I said, I think what you're doing with the book, and I think it's great, is this is the psychological piece that I think is missing because, like I said, I'm not a fan of therapy. Everyone's like, let's talk about your problems. Like, I know what my fucking problems are. I don't think about them every day. Now I need to tell you, like, why do I need to tell you? Like, you don't know anything, like, or not you, but, like some therapist that's not, I've talked to like one combat vet who was like a door gunner in Vietnam, and it was like, okay, cool, but it still wasn't like, that's not my jam. Like I feel like that's, I'm not a fan, but I liked what you're talking with you. And like I said, the Battle Within stuff, that makes way more sense. And I think that's something that I agree with you needs to get out to guys that are out there, that shouldn't be, it's up to you, but I don't think they want to sit in front of a therapist that's some, whatever doctorate and that's 27 years old. Like,
I think that's why this book is so important for therapists too. Cause imagine what this conversation would have been like if I'd come in here and started talking to you about, neuroscience and the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and how, chronic stress and trauma change the way that your brain functions. And there's all these neurochemical changes and the way that our neurotransmitters end up different. And, that if we do all these different behaviors, we'll feel better. But you know what? Again, a lot of these guys eating bullets, they're guys who make their beds. They're guys who eat perfect diets. They're guys who are in the gym 5 days a week that can squat a fucking tractor. These people are an image of perfect fitness and behaviors too that are healthy. A lot of these guys though, that despite doing everything right on the outside, no matter how much you do right on the outside, you can't make everything right on the inside. And I think that that's one of the pieces of ancient wisdom. And there's a saying, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that we are a culture that is starving for wisdom and drowning in information. And when I get on social media,
yeah, that's great.
And I scroll, and when no offense to anybody, no offense. There's all these influencers, there's all these famous veterans out there, good for them, that have these giant microphones and all that are just drowning us in information. drowning us in information. We do not need more, despite all of the additional information we have. It is not making a dent in the issues that we face. Knowing more about the neuroscience of this and neurochemistry and knowing about, emotional regulation skills, it's not making a big dent in this problem, because most veterans are not going to hear about the neuroscience of it and the emotional regulation skills and be like, yeah, that's great. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to journal about how I'm feeling. And I'm going to go sit down and talk to a therapist and explore some of my, nobody's going to do that, because if you don't address the warrior complex that is in the way of a person adopting some of these things, it doesn't matter. That the warrior complex hijacks the personality. And this is a key insight of Jungian psychology. We all have an objective personality. We have a true self. And that these other things like maladaptive psychological defenses that occur from trauma and complexes, they all distort the personality. We lose touch with the true self. And that no amount of meditation, no right diet, no amount of exercise is going to make that better. And again, we're drowning in information and starving for wisdom. And that this is where these ancient myths, in the Odyssey, and the reason I wrote this book is to hopefully give us a little taste. This book is half the length of the original manuscript, by the way, because I had to make it digestible. But that's why I wrote this book, is to help us understand that wholeness is absolutely vital to our well-being, and having or living a life that is based on one teeny tiny partial aspect of the self, the warrior complex, that is not wholeness. That is, you are living with a fragment of your potential, if that's all that you're leading with.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, I agree with you. I think, being always well-rounded, I guess, like I say, it's like that old saying, just be well-rounded, and I agree with you. You have to know when to turn it off, know when to turn it on. But I like that aspect, what you said. It's like that, especially with the drowning information, like I know what happened with, my first panic attacks, you know what I mean? And like identifying it, but what does that do? It's like, okay, cool. Like I can avoid, eating healthy, but eating better, doing this, but it was definitely psychological, because before those happened, I was fit as a fiddle and I could drink my way through and not have an issue. Now, if I have 2 drinks, I feel like I'm having a panic attack, or clearly it affects me psychologically, or clearly there's something different now that bridge is broken. Once that kind of happened, it's like, oh, okay, now I'm dealing with what other guys dealt with 10 years prior. Right. I think I got lucky and got away with it, just accidentally, not identifying what it was. And I just blew past it psychologically.
Yeah.
So I delayed it for probably 6 years, but it finally hit. And now I've talked to other guys too, and it's like, well, this is what happened. But I agree. That's like, what happened, like the limbic system, all that stuff. It's like, oh, it's shot. It's like, okay, but how do we address it? Like, I'm not, not even, I don't want to say I'm like hippy dippy on that stuff, but I'm not a fan of taking, I'm not, they were like, hey, why don't you take, I can't remember what it was, Clonopin or something, or some other stuff. And I'm like, well, not really. I don't like doing that. I tried some edibles. Sometimes they work. Not a big fan. Right. If they go sideways, like it's not good. So but I like what you're saying here, because it's like, for guys that'll identify what's going on, and it relates to the warrior. You are right. Yep. We are a separate class, but you still have to understand what's going on and how it affects the people around you, yep. and I think guys, especially like us and the guys you talk to, you're part of that. You're part of the warrior part of the culture, which is very few, and it's a burden everyone takes on. And it's one of the most consistent things across humankind. Like this, warriors protect, warriors go off and make the sacrifice and protect the whole, either how small the group or how big the group, being a part of that elite group. But also, like you said, and knowing that and being like, hey, how do we move on as a whole, and I agree with you. I think that is missing. I think what you've talked about with the hero's journey is that it's missing. Because you're right. These guys are in amazing shape. They're doing all sorts of stuff and they're offing themselves.
Yep.
You know, you look at their social media and they're like, hey, life's amazing. Look at my hot wife and look at all this stuff. And then a week later, they kill themselves.
Yep.
And so
Guys
you're
who
like,
they appear to have everything. I mean, some of the guys that we've lost to suicide have been
Yeah.
absolute legends in, elite, warrior communities,
Exactly,
Delta
yeah.
operators, Ranger Regiment guys that are absolute legends that seem like they have everything going for them, successful businesses, beautiful families. There's been mental health influencers that we've lost to suicide, and that everything can look right on the outside and it can be hell inside. And I think we've really underestimated that. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that we're having this conversation. And I mean, my vision for the future is that we can cultivate a veteran community that sets the stage for the next generation to have it better than we've had it. And I think that we are standing on the shoulders of giants that, the work of people like Carl Marlantes, epic Vietnam veteran, highly decorated warrior himself, who wrote What It Is Like to Go to War. And his book set the stage for this one, that none of my insights would have been possible without Carl, who graciously wrote the foreword to this book. But I would love to see us create the kind of veteran community that provides the post-war initiation that the next generation of warriors is going to need. I'd love to see groups of us who have done this work on the deepest possible levels, who've gone to the very bottom of their souls to get in touch with what's missing from them, to come together and provide the kind of post-war initiation process that we have at the Battle Within, where we can take the warriors of the future and give them what we didn't get, to help them connect with this kind of ancient wisdom in a way that rebalances their souls, that makes their transition back to civilian life more whole. I'm very grateful to have a family with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old who are beautiful and the most precious thing in the world to me. That they have given me, a taste of life that I wouldn't have had I not done all the healing work that set the stage for me to have a healthy family. That I did over 6 years of Jungian analysis before I had my family. And thank God for that. But I think about how different my life would have been if in 2008 I would have gotten what I had to work for through more than a decade of organic recovery without that kind of support. So I'd love to see us provide that support for the future generations so they don't miss out on their 20s and their 30s. And that so nobody's having to wait until they're 45 or 50 or 55 to get this kind of support. We've had guys go through the Battle Within. We had a Silver Star recipient from Vietnam go through this program. We had an 82-year-old on our ropes course last year in the 5-day program. And to me, it's a beautiful thing to witness those moments, and also heartbreaking because it shouldn't have had to take so long. And I think that we can make a difference so that it doesn't have to, but it has to start with each of us doing our own work in a deep way, as deep as we can go, So, I mean, that's my take. That's my vision. That's where I'd like to see us go as a community. And, I just hope I can play a little part in that.
No, that's great. That's awesome. In fact, this is an awesome podcast. We could go for hours on this, but, where can people find you? Where can they find the Battle Within? Guys that want to reach out, the book. I mean, the book sounds phenomenal. I think getting the book in the hands of guys is probably I don't say just as effective, but you know what I mean? Like it's very effective if they want to go to, like for me, it would be cool to maybe go to the Battle Within, but I know if I read that the book would give me more structure to what I'm already doing, that would probably help me better along the way. I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there like that, as well as guys that are like, I do need to go understand what the fuck's going on with me. Why am I feeling this way? So where can they find the book? Where can they look at Battle Within, all that stuff?
So a few things. So one, you can grab Odysseus in the Ore, Healing After War and Military Service. You can grab it at Dead Reckoning Collective's website. These guys are veterans who started this beautiful publishing company, and everything they publish is gold. Every time I read a new book from Dead Reckoning Collective, I'm in awe of the caliber of authors from our generation of veterans. It's unbelievable. So make sure you follow them on Instagram. You can also buy the book on Amazon. You can find me through my Instagram account, which is Odysseus in the Ore. I'm actually going to be doing a giveaway and some contests here soon. I'm going to be giving away a bunch of stuff, but one of the things I'm going to be giving away is this 9-line Apparel hat, along with a bunch of goodies from Dead Reckoning Collective. So a $50 gift card to their website where you can buy some of these awesome books. So follow me on Instagram. I also have a website, OdysseusandtheOar.com. You can subscribe. I'll send out emails on rare occasions just about meaningful updates. And I'd also encourage you to follow the Battle Within. We're in Kansas City, Missouri. We've got those 2 programs. We've got the 5-day, and then we've got the Frontline Therapy Network, where we do clinical interviews and get a sense of what kind of therapy fits the person's situation and get them with a therapist who can help. We have therapists in quite a few states. We're not everywhere, so in some cases we're not able to connect you with a therapist, but we can at least point you in the right direction. So that 5-day program, if you go to the 5-day, we will recruit a therapist for you no matter where you live and help you get hooked up with somebody. So it's a great place to start.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, Ethan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate having this kind of conversation with a fellow combat veteran, and appreciate everything that you continue to do by telling important stories and risking yourself to do it. So when I saw you were in Ukraine last week, I was just like, dude, I absolutely just have the most respect. Somebody's got to be out there telling those stories, and some of the images and stuff that you've grabbed and shared are unbelievul.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I admire you as a storyteller. Just really, really appreciate that. So, but yeah, wishing you and everybody at 9-line the best.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.